So before we start with the manipulation, let me make a quick explanation of how I usually set up the whole thing before I start. I usually don't make sketches or drawings or anything like that. I usually have it all in my head. Maybe it's not the best approach to this, but that's how I operate. So usually I have a general idea of what I like, but it's a really rough idea. So I usually use the main element as inspiration, in this case the woman. I saw her laying down against that tree and I pretty much envisioned this kind of manipulation, the colors and all of that, so I had it all in my head. But at the beginning stage it's all, as I said, a really rough idea and just have a basic concept of it. Usually I start with the background, so after I have the main character, which I know is going to be the central pillar of this manipulation or the artwork that I'm working on, after that I go to the background. So I usually start with the background actually, and in this case I have a really simple fantasy looking background. This is really simple to do. You can use pretty much any image you want, as long as it goes along with the general lighting on your model. A big mistake in my opinion is trying to have a model like this with this kind of lighting and trying to add her on a dark or night environment. This is going to give you a lot of work, and you need to be really skillful in how you retouch the model in order to integrate that into a dark environment. So be careful on how you pick your stock images. In my case, I wanted to have a daylight image. I pretty much knew what I had in mind, so I had it all in my head before I started, and I knew I wanted to have like a bright, colorful, kind of green dominating colors on this and blue. So I had a rough idea in my head. So I created a really basic background and then I add the model in here, and after that I can add all the rest of the elements accordingly. That's basically how I put things together. First I start with the background, add the main element, and then add all the rest of the details and elements around those two main elements, which is the background and the model. So that being said, let's get started. I'll use a smaller canvas size than on the original. On the original I use almost 4000 by 4500, but for the tutorial I will use 72 on the resolution, and then we'll scale this down to about 2000 by, let's say, 2300, more or less. You can adapt things as you go. I will start by adding the first element, which is the model, because she's the one that's going to limit how tall we can make this canvas. So let's go to the stock folder, and from here I'll pick the woman. You can use the quick selection tool, you can use the magic wand or manual masking her. You can use pretty much any method you want. I'm not gonna make a detailed explanation on how to extract her from the background, because in this particular case is very easy, and also I assume you already know extraction techniques, because this is not a tutorial for beginners. As for the details here on the hair, you don't have to be really precise. What you get with the quick selection tool is good enough, because we will add our own hair on top of this one, and also I will show you how to paint hair yourself using a simple brush. Yeah, let's leave it like that. Let's see on the bottom. Yeah, we need some touch-ups here and there. Let's leave it like that and create a layer mask. So this is our rough mask. To refine this mask, you can right click and choose select and mask or refine edge, or really depends on the Photoshop version that you are using. I will increase the feather, shift the edge -20 or so, and increase the contrast a little, and probably increase the feather some more. You can change the view from up here, so you can have it on black and white or on layers if you have layers underneath, and click OK. Press the V key to select the move tool and move this back here like that. Turn this into a smart object, make her fit our canvas, because that's what we need. About there. And we have the model. We'll probably move her around or maybe change the size of it, but for now, let's leave this here. Let's move on and start making the background. On the resources folder, you will find several images. Like for example, I use this one, but you can use pretty much any image you want because we're going to blur this a little. So I'm gonna drop this right here, make it pretty big, and drag it underneath the layer. Let's start naming this. So I'm gonna name this model. This is the layer of the girl, and I will name this background BG. And the background, the white background, I will remove it because I don't need it. For now, I will make this something like that. I'm not too worried about this girl over here because I will most likely hide that part with the wall, which I will add right now. So let's open the wall image. I just used left part of the wall, but you can use this other one, or you can even use both of them and have like an entrance there. It's really up to you. I went with the basic, with a really basic wall. Just I wanted to close part of the manipulation with this wall and keep the viewer watching the girl, which is the main part of the manipulation. At least that was my goal. So let's select this part. Let's create a layer mask for this. I will leave this part of the floor selected, of the ground. Make a mask like that. Again, right click and choose select and mask. Shift the edge on the negative side, increase the feather. I will change the view to black and white so I can see the edges a little better, and increase the contrast to sharpen the edges a little more. Whenever you're refining the mask, make sure you are at 100% zoom so you can see exactly what you're doing. Okay, that will do. Click OK. I will apply the layer mask. I don't think I will edit it anymore. With the move tool, press the V key to select it. You can move this layer to the other document by simply dragging it over that other tab and let go here. You can see it's pretty big, so I can convert this into a smart object now. I always use smart objects just whenever I make an object smaller, just so I can so that I make sure I have the whole image there in case I want to change the size so that I don't lose quality. Keep in mind the perspective. So for example, what I mean by this is if you can see maybe the knees of the girl are here, don't put the wall up there. You're gonna cover too much. It still looks nice, but I think it covers too much. Also, again, with the horizon on the background, if you add it like that, it's kind of looking weird. I don't know. So I think I will use it. I will add it about there. Now that girl is still there, so we can probably get rid of her. First, let me make this a little smaller, move this to the side, and she's gone. Anyways, we can still cover her by adding other elements. So first add all the elements in there, and then you can make sure you cover things up. Don't give yourself more work than necessary. You could use a clone stamp to really quickly cover this, but I don't think it's necessary since we still have other elements to add, so we can cover her with other stock images. We have the wall there. Let's name this layer to wall. And now we have the basic setup here. The main element, the main composition is done. Now what you can do is just move things around, make sure the things are balanced, but the main part of the composition is done with just 3 layers. Some other manipulations take more than that, but for this one, we're done with the basic composition. So as you can see, the way I'm working is starting with the big elements of the composition and then going like backwards, going to more and more detailed things every time. So the next part that makes the next important part of this manipulation, let's say, is the wings, then making the hair and adding the big elements around here, and then going every time to smaller details, and then retouching and things like that. So let's add the wings. I used a 3D illustration of an angel. It's really easy to subtract this. You can use the magic wand tool. Every time you select something like this, especially when you're working with isolated object, like in this case we have lots of black background, instead there are two ways of doing it, the easy way and the hard way. The easy way would be to use the magic wand tool or other extraction tools to select the background, because it's the element that surrounds this and it's all uniform. We have no contrast changes, no gradients. And the difficult part would be to use the quick selection tool and try to select the feathers. So in this case I will use the magic wand tool. I'll try using a tolerance of 30. I will not use the contiguous, because there's no other really black part inside the wings themselves, only through these feathers, which is okay. So I will click the black background and just zoom in at 100% and make a really quick check to see what is selected and what it's not. Looks pretty good to me. So I will zoom back out, create a layer mask. In this case I will create an inverted layer mask. So for that I will press and hold the Option key or Alt on Windows and click on the layer mask. This will hide my selection, well, the background. And we still have to make some touch-ups here. I will show you how to get rid of this pixel over here, but I will do that after I move the wings to my manipulation. So the first thing I will do before I do that is use the brush tool and paint with black on this layer mask to get rid of the man's body. I'll apply the layer mask. Now I'll select the whole thing here, crop it, and go back to my, let's close images that we no longer need. I'll go here and paste this between the wall and the model. So press Ctrl V or Command V if you're using a Mac. Let's name this wings. And I'll turn this into a smart object for now until I'm sure that I have the right size for it. Make it smaller. I'll flip it horizontally. You can see the keyboard shortcuts that I press, so you can see what I'm doing, but I'll try to mention everything that I'm doing. So basically what I'm doing here, I want to place the wings here in a way that it's realistic. You can also modify this with the puppet warp, but I want to have them smaller. Now, the problem that we have here is I want to have most of the wing visible, but if I make it smaller, you can see that it looks like a really small wing compared to the woman's body. So for that we have to make it way bigger, like so. So I still also want to have this part somewhere sticking out from her back, not from her neck. So we have to be careful with that. So you can still want to make people believe that she's actually like an angel or a fairy. So I'm gonna put that there for now and probably move the whole thing, the model and the wings, more towards the right side, so that way I can see more of the wings. But let me show you how you can modify the wings a little so you can show more of them. I will place them on here on the top layer just so I can see them. You can go to edit and choose the puppet warp. Now, if you have a really old version of Photoshop like CS6, I don't know if this is available. Basically what this does is it creates a mesh. So here you can add points. For example, I can add a point there. This can be used as pivot points, but you have to make sure you lock the rest of the image that you don't want to move. And now I'm gonna add one there and just click and move it like that. If you have straight edges, they will be modified, so be careful with that. Pay close attention on how things work. If you want to hide the mesh and see how this looks like, you can press Ctrl H or Command H if you're on Windows, and you can hide the mesh so you can see how this looks like. I want to curve this like this because that way I can still make this part, make it look like it's sticking out from her back, and also show more of the wing without having to make the whole wing smaller. Also, if you press the Alt or Option key on the Mac, while you select one of these points, you can see this circle shows up. Let me hide the mesh so you can see it better. And this is to rotate. You can use this to rotate each point. So for example, here you will see it a lot better. Let me control click to select it. I can see you can rotate things around there. So that's that. I'm gonna press enter to accept the change. I think it looks pretty good. And move the layer back underneath the model and move this there. Now, since this is a smart object, if I go to the puppet warp, I can double click and edit it whenever I want. So smart objects are really useful in this case. I will leave that there. That's how I added the wings on this model. We still have to edit them and integrate them because you can see the whites are different, the light is different, but we will do that later on. Let's move on, and next we will add the hair. Adding a new hair to a model can be tricky, and in our case it's not really adding the hair but fixing the part of the hair that we cut. We can also improve this. If you take a look at the original image, you have this part of some sticking hairs, but we can do more to make this look a little more fantasy. We have two options here. Actually, we have three options. One of it is to paint it ourselves. If you're not skilled enough, you can use a stock image, which again can be tricky because you have to select the hair, which is not an easy task. And also you can use already painted hair. Now, this part of the tutorial I want to get into a little more detail. So first I will show you the easy way, which is using an already painted hair. But in fact, I use a combination of the three methods I just mentioned. So the first one, the easy way, is to use an image of an already painted hair, which is what I did. This is an image I purchased from DeviantArt. And in any case, using any of the three methods, it involves also color corrections to make this hair or the hair that you paint fit the hair on your model. So let's open first this one. You can see it's a pretty realistic image in my opinion. I will paste it there, fit my model's hair, and you can see we can do a pretty good job using this. Now, of course, you have to change the size of this, position, rotate, and just make it look as realistic as possible. I would add this probably around there, like that. And on the model, we will have to create a layer mask because we have to blend this in. All the hair that I add, I will group it. So I will name this group hair. And eventually everything that belongs to the woman will be inside a group. So I will select the wings, the hair group, and the model itself. Press Ctrl G or Command G on a Mac and name this model. So everything that belongs to the model will be inside of this group. Great, now let's move on. Now on the model layer mask, I'll press the B key to select brush, and I will use the black color and a soft brush because I want to gently paint out this hair. I also want to reduce the opacity and the flow to about 50 and 40 and just paint this out to kind of integrate it. Now, as for the color on this, let's name this painted hair. I will use the curves adjustment. Now, working with curves I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. Basically, I want to reduce make it darker a little bit and probably add some red in there, like so. Go back to the RGB and probably make it even darker. And also maybe add some, let's see, maybe more magenta. And we got a pretty close look to the original one. Well, we still have to add some shadows in here to make it blend in, because you can see we have that shadow there and here we have a bright side, but we will do that a little later. Now the second method would be to paint some of the hair ourselves. If you see these strands of hair, the single hairs sticking out, you can easily paint this out yourself. You don't have to be really skillful. I'm going to show you how to do that. First, create a new layer underneath the woman, obviously. Let's name this brush hair and get the brush tool. Use a hardness of 100% and the size of 1 or 2 pixels, depending on how big your canvas is or your resolution of your image. In my case, with 1 pixel, it's okay. Here, it's a lot easier if you have a graphics tablet. You can do it with the mouse, but it's not going to be that easy. I'm using a graphics tablet, so what I want to do now with this basic brush, I will go to the brush settings and I'll check the transfer option and set the control to pen pressure. That way, when I paint, let me make a few tests here so you can see. Basically what this does is when you paint, it really takes, the opacity is controlled by how hard you press on the pen. So that way you can control the opacity of it. Also, if you combine this with the shape dynamics and change the size jitter to pen pressure, but I will increase the minimum diameter to 15%. This will also help you make really detailed and really fine hairs. And everything is controlled with how hard you press on the brush. So that being said, that's the setup of my brush. Spacing, I'll leave it to 10%. Now I can sample here from the hair itself by pressing the Alt key and clicking. This will sample the color, as you can see. And now let me set this everything to 0 here. On this brush hair layer, I can start painting hairs like that. Now be careful because you have to change the color. For example, here we have this dark hair. I have to sample from here and make some, well, sample from there and start making some hairs like that. Now, as I said, you don't have to be really skilled with this. It's pretty simple. Also, you can use this image as reference, so you can, oh, that was too big. So you can use that image as reference to paint those hairs a little more realistically. Let's probably do something like that here on the background as well. Keep in mind, I'm at 300% zoom, so once I zoom out, this is going to look a little more realistic. Don't be afraid to add some flying hairs like that. Well, not really like that, but something like that. And of course, you can combine that with these other hairs. You can even paint here. You can see here we lack some of those flying hairs. You can sample from there and use this as a base and add your own flying hairs. Those are really, I think these flying hairs are quite realistic. They add a lot of realism to the image because it's pretty hard to select them in Photoshop, so why not paint them yourself? Okay, so you can see with and without. I think it adds a pretty good amount of detail there. Now let's see another method which I did not use on the original, and that is using an original stock image. I want to show you yet another method of selecting hair using a real stock image. This can be really challenging. I will just show you like how to extract hair from a solid color image, which I know it's easier, but I will show you a technique which you probably don't know. Now, I used this model because it's pretty similar to my model, so I will open this in Photoshop, and for this we will use calculations, and I want to extract this from this background. There are some really advanced techniques that will allow you to keep even these hairs. I'm not going to go into that because I just need like most of the hair, not every single strand of it, and usually those advanced techniques go through several iterations of several techniques, so we could spend like an hour extracting this. So I will just show you like a more basic technique. The technique consists of going into the channels first, and here we have, you can see we have 3 channels: red, green, and blue. Our objective is to create enough separation between the background and the hair so that we can extract it. Now, if you go through these channels, the red, green, and blue, you will see that in our case, the green channel is the one that gives us most contrast between the hair and the background. This is not always the case because it really depends on the color of your background. My background in this case kind of has a greenish tint, so in my case this one works. Now the next step is, after you select this green layer, is to go to image and choose calculations. You can see that because I had the green layer selected, the green layer shows up here. Now let me explain what this does. The calculation panel, what it does is simply uses two sources. It uses the channels of two sources, source 1, source 2, and then it blends them together using a blend mode. It's as simple as that. And I will use the green channel to mix it with another channel, let's say blue, using the overlay blend mode. You can see nothing changed here because they're pretty similar, but you can go through these blend modes and see which ones give you better contrast. Now you can repeat this process a few times until you get something that you want. Overlay is probably not the best one. Linear burn, you can see, if you take a look at this flying hairs around here, linear burn gives me better contrast in here. It darkens the whole background a bit. Now, the result will be put on a new channel. We can also create a new document or a selection, but we will leave this on new channel because we will repeat the process again. Click OK. And now we have this alpha 1 layer. Go back to image, calculations, and this time I will change the blend mode to overlay. Let's see what we get. And I will mix maybe the red layer or maybe the green layer with alpha 1. I will leave it there because it's going to give me a good contrast. Let's try blue and try other blend modes, see what we get. See here we really add more contrast, but the background is too dark, so I don't want that. Let me see if I can find other blend modes. Overlay seems to look pretty good. I don't know. Maybe I will use the green layer with some other blend mode. With hard light, I lose some of the details, but I think it's good enough. I will click OK. Now, one mistake that a lot of people make is they want to have like the background completely white, pure white, and the hair, every single strand of hair, to be pure black. And that way they think that's a great mask. And that's not true, because you have to keep in mind transparencies. This almost white background is going to be almost invisible after you mask it, and you will see that in just a second. So don't get yourself obsessed with having a perfectly white background. On top of that, what you can do in order to make this a little more closer to pure white is get the brush tool, work on this alpha layer. I'm going to use a soft brush, something a little bigger like that, and change the blend mode of the brush to overlay. Now switch the color to white, and I'll drop the opacity to 50 and the flow to about 20. If I paint on the white, you can see, let me also disable the shape dynamics and the transfer. If I paint over this, you can see the white gets whiter, but the black stays black. Okay, so you can do that as well. But in my case, I'm not going to do this because this is really sensitive. If you have like really hard edges, that would do. But since I have all of this flying hairs, really fine lines, what I will do is just use the curves. So I'll press Ctrl M or Command M and move the whole white point towards the left a bit and the black point towards the right, and probably make a slight S curve here. See how we increased a little more the contrast. Now I'll click OK, and I will use this as my mask. I'll press Command or Control and click on the thumbnail of the alpha layer. This will load the selection, and it's going to load everything, not only the ones everything that you see here. It's going to load the semi-transparencies here. So now I'm going to RGB, layers, and create my layer mask. Now the layer mask is inverted, so I'll press Ctrl I or Command I, and this is my hair. We still have remainings from the background. I'll show you how to fix that. Just we will use the same technique that we will use for the wings, because we're not done with the wings yet. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I get rid of the rest of the image that I'm not interested in. Fill this with black, and here is my layer. Actually, I'm gonna paint this with a brush, and I'll move the whole thing with the layer mask. Let's name this stock hair. Now, in order to move this, what I will do is select the move tool with the V key, and I'll click on the canvas and drag this to my other document, and this will move the whole thing with the layer mask in here, and I'll put this inside the hair group. The brush hair should be inside of this group as well, and I will flip this. Actually, I want this hair to stick out from behind the tree, so I'll put this over there and make it smaller because it's kind of big. I don't need it that big, and I don't know, maybe something like that. The size of it, I think it's good enough, around there. Now you can see that we still have parts of the background. So how do we fix that? We can use several methods. The first one is using curves, using the brush tool as well. Actually, for the edges, I will use the brush, just paint with black. With the soft brush, make sure you have a soft brush so that you have a good transition and a soft transition, and get rid of those straight lines like that. Now we solved a big part of it. Now we still have this halo around. What you can do is, since we have the hair over this background, that's why I always recommend working on the details of the hair once you have the layer over the rest of your layers, because the details that we have here on the background, I mean, it doesn't really matter if we lose the flying hairs, because the details that we have here on the background would mask those anyways, so you would not be able to see those anyways. On top of that, you can always come back and paint some of them if you think they're really important. So that being said, what you can do is get the mask and try to add some more curves on the layer mask itself and see how you can do, how far you can go without losing too much of the hairs themselves. So something like that, I think it's going to work. See that before, after. Okay, now we still have the problem of the hairs right over here. How do we fix that? Now we have to go back into editing the mask. For that, right click on the mask, choose select and mask, make sure that you're at 100% zoom, and here we're not going to touch any of these sliders. The only thing we're going to do is first make sure you have the view to on layers, and scroll down here, and on the output settings make sure you have the output to layer mask or new layer with layer mask. It's an even better option because if you screw up, you can still have the original. And click decontaminate colors. What this does is it uses the background, the colors on the background on each part of the image, to try and blend the edges with those colors. So here it's going to use this color, here on the rocks it's going to use this color, and that way you can see how it looks like. Now the amount of 100% is most of the times is too much, so you have to kind of slide this around and see what it does. I think around there it's going to work just fine, and I will click OK. Now once I click OK, you can see it created a new layer with its own layer mask, and if I screw up or if I want to modify this and I decide I want to use other values, I can just delete this layer and come back to the original and edit this again. One other thing you can still do if you want to improve some parts of this even more is you can create a new layer on top of it as a clipping mask. And now get the brush tool, and what I can do is just sample a color from the hair itself, change the color of this layer to, you can either use color or darken. I'll choose darken just to see how that works, and use an opacity of 50 and a flow of about 40 on the brush, and just paint over it and see how that looks. Now, these settings on the brush are too strong for me, so I'll also activate the transfer because I have the graphics tablet. If you don't have this, what you can do is drop the opacity and the flow even more, because you want to have control over this. You want to paint this gently until you get the effect that you're after. Now, just sample colors from around there and just paint like that. Also, one thing I didn't mention is, now you can see the colors don't match. Here we have a lot more orange, this one is pretty red, so what I could probably do is go to the layer itself of the hair and use curves. Now here you have to have some skills using curves. You can use other adjustments if you want to, like for example hue saturation. Maybe it's easier for some of you. In terms of darkness I think is okay, but in terms of color is not, so I will probably go to the blue channel because I need to introduce more yellow in here, and on the green probably add a little, no, not more green, we have enough, also enough magenta. Especially on the bright sides, I could probably add more, yeah, a little more yellow, something like that. Probably even more yellow. Yeah, like so. I think that looks a little better. See that? The original and with the curves, I think it looks a little better. And probably on the RGB, darken the whole thing a little more. Okay, see how it was before the curves and after the curves. Also, that helps to darken those edges a little more. So probably those painted edges are not really that necessary. But anyways, there we have the hair. Now you can, of course, as I said, with the painted hair, on the brush hair, you can go ahead and repeat the process here again if you want to. So working with hair always gives you some headaches, but you can see I can go on and paint some flying hairs here and use the base as reference and just paint some flying hairs around here and give some continuity to this if I lost some of those hairs. Let me just really quickly add a few ones here just so you can see how it looks before and after. I pretty much always do this when I work with hair, so I kind of got used to it. Using a graphics tablet helps you tremendously here. And you can use a cheap one. You don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on one. You can buy like a $60 graphics tablet and it will work just fine. So let me show the before and after. Just a few flying hairs there. You can see how now this looks a little more realistic. And not to mention here on top, I think it looks pretty awesome. Now that we are here, we can do the same here on the wings. You can use decontaminate colors to get rid of this dark parts of the wings. So just select them, control click, create the layer mask, right click on the layer mask, choose select and mask, decontaminate colors, and you can see how that starts to go away. I will shift or rather increase the feather a little so that this helps to grab more edge, and probably increase the contrast a little and shift the edge slightly. The amount I'm going to reduce it. And let me show you the before and after. Show original, before and after. It's not much, but it hides some of those dark lines on the wings. So that's the tricky part with the hair. Let's move on and start adding some elements around this and create a little more depth of field. So we have the most important parts in here, but the canvas looks like really empty. So now it's time to start adding some details and create some depth of field. Let's start by creating some depth of field. For that I would use plants and other elements, but usually plants work nice to do this. And inside the resources folder you will find some bushes. You can use other PNG plants or other elements that if you want. I'll just use this bush for example. And it's really easy. Basically you want to add some foreground elements. So I will paste this on top of the model group. Just place this over here like that and blur it. My advice is to use the blur gallery, the field blur if you can, because it's much more realistic. And the amount of blur really depends on the canvas size, because if I use 15 pixels on this canvas size, which is 2000 by 2300 pixels, it's gonna look different than on a bigger canvas. So it really depends on how much depth of field you want to create and how big your canvas is. Don't do something like this. This is too blurry. You still want to see the details of the object that you're placing. So in my case, I think 20 pixels looks okay. This is for the foreground, and also we can achieve the same effect. We can enhance the depth of field if we do the same on the background. Also with the background is, since this is kind of it's more like an illustration or a digital painting, you can see the details in here. If you blur it, you will get rid of some of those details and you can make it look, well actually you can hide unwanted details. Let's go again to filter, blur gallery, and add fill blur. And also if you blur the background, you will be able to focus more on your model. Now 15 pixels is too much. I want to blur it a little less, maybe 10. Okay, that's for the background. We're not done with the background. Later on we will add some other elements in there. For example, you can add a tree in the background, or you can add, well, pretty much any element that you want. Another thing that I did is I added some plants on the top. By the way, you can also achieve these with these leaves, which we will add at the end. Those will be part of the ambient details. But let's add other elements. For example, this rose plant, and here I will use the same technique I used when extracting the hair, which is using calculations. So again, this will help you repeat the process again and learn how to use it even more. Basically, we go to channels, check each channel and choose the one that gives us most contrast between the background and the object that we want to subtract. In this case, it's the blue channel. You can see that the background is pretty white and most of the plant is black. So once we have the channel that we want, go to image, calculations, and here we could, most of the times, just using the same channel and multiply it by itself, or using, sometimes highlight works good, sometimes burn, color burn or linear burn or multiply works well. So I will use multiply, and this on this new alpha channel now I will use levels, just to make those lights even brighter and the darks even darker. Click OK, and now this part over here looks really good. Remember, we will blur this, so it doesn't really matter if the edges are not 100% precise, or if we mask part of these leaves, for example, because we will blur this and it's not going to be visible anyways. But we still have this gray area here. The top part is okay because we have white and black, but here we have some gray areas which are not really desirable. So how do you get rid of that? We get the brush tool. Again, switch the blend mode of the brush to overlay, increase the brush size a little and decrease the hardness, and switch the foreground color to white and start painting. Now you will see that some of the flowers will be selected, some of the roses themselves, But as I said, in this particular case is not really that important because we will get rid of most of the details by blurring this this bush anyway. So don't pay too much attention on places like this if you're going to blur this. So I will leave it like that. Let's see how it looks like. I'll press Control click on the Alpha 1 thumbnail, or Command click. This will select everything that is black. Go to RGB, select layers, and now create the layer mask. This will create this inverted layer mask. Now I'll press Control Command I, and this will invert the layer mask again. Now I will brush back in some part, like this is really like exaggerated, so I want to recover that. I'm gonna go back to normal on the brush, and here with the hardness of about 80%, I'll just brush back parts of this to recover it because this is way too extreme. Okay, now I will apply the layer mask because I think it looks pretty good. I'll select the whole canvas, Control X to cut that. Go in here and I'll paste this behind the wall. So press Control V and you'll see that this is pretty huge. Always try to work with the full resolution of the image when you're masking, because when you make the image smaller, you gain a lot of quality. So you can see that those edges, you can't even tell they were there. I'll zoom in at 100% and you see it looks perfect. Okay, see that? I'll blur this just like I did with this tree, with that bush, but I'll name this rose. And I'm gonna go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and choose Filled Blur. Now I'll use a smaller amount of blur. You have to think of this like this is on the foreground really blurred, and the background it was not that blurred. So this one should have the same amount of blur as the background, more or less. So I'll put this to 10, just like I had on my background, maybe even less, like 8, and click OK. And see, I think it looks pretty nice. You can still tell that that's rose, but you don't see the details. Now, one other thing you can do to fill in and kind of close this and create a framing here is add some plants or leaves. Imagine that the tree, well, it's falling, the leaves are falling here, well, the branches actually. So that's exactly what I did. Let me open these two images. One of them is this one and the other one is this one. So let me open that. Here is really easy. I will use the magic wand tool again. I'll uncheck contiguous and just click on the white background and Alt click on the layer mask, and that's it. That's a great thing of using stock images which are isolated, and it's really worth paying for them because it's gonna save you a lot of time and you will use them in more than one project. So I'm gonna use select and mask just because I want to make sure I remove the edges there on the still have to recover some parts over there. Increase the feather and contrast, and with the brush I will recover, I'll paint back in some of those areas here. This happens because I did not use the contiguous option, and wherever we have highlights, those areas are gone. So make sure you paint them back in. Put this behind the model, so under the model layer, and just position it however you like. I'll turn it into a smart object before I make further modifications, because okay, something like that. And now I'll add the other one. So press Ctrl O or Command O and open the other image, and here we'll do exactly the same thing. Select the magic wand, click on the background, Alt click to mask, and here we'll probably lost some more areas. So I'll do this really quick, but yeah, pay attention to details, for example like this, because I lost almost the entire leaf there. Now again, I'll apply the layer mask, copy this and paste it right here. This one I'll paste it on top. I'll turn this into a smart object. zoom out and make it way smaller because this is huge. Now I'll have to flip it horizontally, and I'll put it right over here, but actually I'll move it behind the model, so under the model group, create a layer mask for it, and with the brush I'll just remove the bottom part because I don't need it. I want to cover part of the canvas but not entirely, so you still want to have some space around there for everything to breathe. Okay, now the greens are a little different. The tones here you can see are a little different, so we will deal with that a little later. But we're starting to get something here. So, and now we have some depth of field here. We can see we simulated some distance, and everything starts to look a little better. On the next step, I'll show you how to add, start making shadows and give this even more depth and dimension. So on the next part, we will draw shadows. When it comes to making the shadows on your manipulation, this step should be one of the last steps when working with manipulations, because you want to make sure that you have all the elements in place. So in my case, I will paint them now, even though the manipulation is not done, because all the I have here all the elements that I need. I will add some other elements that will create more ambient, but the elements that cast shadows here are done. Let's get started with painting the shadows. Now we have to make basically two kinds of shadows. So we have to make like the big shadows, the big soft shadows around here that the big objects place, and then some other smaller shadows, for example for the wings and the shadows that this tree casts on the wall and the whole model that casts here on this side. So you most likely have several shadow layers. In my case, the first shadow I want to paint is the shadow that the model and the tree casts here on this stone wall. So I will go to the stone wall, create a new layer on top of it, and I will clip this to the wall, and I will name this wall shadow. And the reason why I do this is because that way I don't have to create masks and all of that, because now everything that I paint will be here on this wall. So for example, let me just make a quick demonstration. I got the brush tool and just paint here. You can see that everything is kept here on the wall because I clipped this to the wall. So let's reveal the rest of the layers. By the way, if you want to hide and show all the layers, a quick tip is press and hold the Option key or Alt on Windows, and if you click on the eye icon while you press that Option key or Alt key down, you will hide the rest of the layer except where you click. Also, on the newer versions of Photoshop, you can just click and drag and hide layers like that as well. So let's stick with the wall shadow and get the brush tool. I'll use a soft brush. When I paint shadows, really soft shadows, usually I use about 40 and 30 for opacity and flow of the brush. And since I also have the graphics tablet, I will choose the transfer option and set the control to pen pressure. That way I have even more control. Now what I want to do here is just paint like a stronger shadow right next to the tree, and then with the soft brush I will just like fade out and have like a less shadow as I move away from the object. Okay, that's that. Maybe I'll paint some shadow here as well. Next, let's go with the wings. Here we have to do the same. Control click the wings to select the layer. You don't have to scroll and find it, or you can also use the filter in here and just search for the name of the layer, but I find it a lot easier if you get the move tool, press and hold the control key or command on Mac and click on the layer, and that way you can select the layer without having to search for it here on the layers panel. So that's a quick way of selecting layers. Here I'll create a new layer on top of it, again clip it, and I'll name this wings shadow. Again, get the brush tool, I'll keep the same settings and just paint some shadow right over there. These are the shadows that are supposed to be casted by the woman's body there. Just a soft shadow like that. Where else? You can also enhance the shadows here on the wall, on the tree, sorry. So let's create a new layer above the model, clip it to the model, and let's name this model shadow. And just paint a little bit around here. Make sure you don't paint over the hand. So just enhance a little bit the shadow on the right side of the tree. Also on the top part, I want to add some shadows around here, like that. And what else? You can also do the same for the leaves here. You can also use, for example, for these leaves, let's name this, I forgot to rename the layer, leaves right. For example, I could use the brush and create this layer, but also I can use a layer style. So for example, I could use a gradient overlay. And let me just increase the contrast and move this around. So you can see I have this linear gradient. I can change the angle, so that makes the shadows come from the top part. And I can do something like this. Play with the scale, and by just clicking and dragging, I can move the gradient up and down. And I just want to have the top parts a little darker, so I can do that there. And the same with the leaves left. Always rename your layers, because it's a lot easier to manage once you have lots of layers, like in this case. Make a smaller scale and probably do something like that. And I think it looks better with this gradient shadow. See that? Because my objective here is to kind of keep the whole thing enclosed in here. So I want to, with small details like this, you can achieve that. But make sure you don't overdo it. So really, basically, that's how I created the shadows. Let me create a snapshot and show you how it looked before. So before the shadows and with the shadows, you can see that it kind of gives it more of a 3D look. So this is really basic, because on some manipulations you have lots of elements and you have to go on each of them and cast the shadows manually. But I think this is one of the fun parts of manipulations. So let's go to the next step and start making some more ambient effects. In order to make your manipulation stand out some more and actually fill the canvas and make it look a lot more interesting, is creating some ambient effect. This is something that I do in almost, if not all, of the manipulations that I create. And this step involves usually using particles and light effects sometimes, and sometimes a combination of both of them, but definitely particles. And that's what we're going to do next. What I will do is just create a new layer on top, and I'll name this, actually I will group it with Control G or Command G on a Mac, and I will name this Ambient Elements. And the particles can be dust, can be, as I said, light effects, or flying debris, or things like that. In our case, what I will do is, since we have this tree here with all these leaves, what I will do is add some falling leaves, and we can combine this with out of focus filters to add even more depth of field than the one we created here with the background and with these plants which we blurred on the previous steps. So let's do that. Let's open the stock folder, and you will find this image called green leaves, and you can open this in Photoshop, and you can go ahead and extract this really easily from the background. You can use the magic wand tool, or you can use the channels and do it that way. Just extract it the way it's easier for you. And now it's just a matter of using the lasso tool or any selection tool you like. This one, the regular lasso tool, and just cut this and start pasting this manually to, and here on the ambient elements, let me just drag this on top of everything. I'll paste this leaf over here. Obviously, I'll make it a little smaller. I could leave it like this. If I want to blur this actually to, let's start with that. I could put it right here, maybe just slightly smaller. And blur it. So I will go to filter, blur gallery, and choose fill blur. And 15 pixels is okay, so I'll leave that there. And you can see that I can make this effect and just create more depth of fill with this. Okay, let's continue. I'll fast forward here because it's just cropping things from here, putting them right over here, changing the size, and just adding some leaves around here. So I'll fast forward here, just I'll add a few ones, and then we can move on. Okay, so this will be the last one that I will add. Do not add a whole lot of them because you can add more other elements as well. So don't stick with just one element. So these are my leaves here. Another thing we can add here is, in this case, insects. So I could add butterflies. I only have 2 here, but you can find online lots of PNG or yeah, these are actually illustrations. But they work just fine, so let's put them in here. I'll just add a couple of them. Once you're done with all the elements, make sure you scatter them right. Make sure you don't have like, in my case here you can see like I have like this round thing, which is not good. So try to put them as randomly as you can. So probably that one there would look a little better, and this one maybe there, and probably I'll hide this one a little more. Okay, so we have those leaves over there. Now the color is not exactly correct, so what I can do in order to fix the color a little bit, since I have all of them inside of one group, I can double click to enter inside the styles of this leaves group. If you have an older version of Photoshop, maybe you cannot do that, so you probably have to turn this into a smart object, but I can do it. So I will go inside the styles of the group itself and just add a color overlay, and I will use a dark green like so. Choose the color, multiply works pretty well. Let's try color burn and see how that looks. It increases the contrast too much and I don't really like that. Yeah, maybe a linear burn is better. And play with the opacity to create a little bit of a darker version of these leaves so that they look a little more like the rest of the leaves on our scene. Also, you can remove color by using another color overlay. Use a neutral tone like gray or black or whatever, and just use the opacity, and if you increase the opacity you can see it turns gray. So the important thing here is the blend mode, which is color. So I basically remove some of the saturation of those leaves. And you can also use stock images of dust or things like that, or smoke, as I said. In this case, smoke it doesn't make sense. So I used the stock image of some dust. So let me just show you how I did that. Inside the resources folder, you will find an image called Night Shining Starry Sky Copy. This is actually dust particles. So just open that. And the important thing here is that it has a dark background, or that it has a white background and black particles. So you have lots of contrast. If the background is black, like in this case, you can use the screen blend mode. So just paste the image on top of your manipulation. Also, we have this light here, this like a burned film effect, which can be useful. So I will put that there, change the blend mode to screen. That will make the whole background go away, except these particles. You can see I still have them here, these dust particles. And what I will do now, let me just switch it back to normal so you can see better what I'm doing, is I will create a layer mask. I will select the elliptical marquee tool because these particles are, there are too many of them. So what I want is just to clear most of the image and just have them on the sides. So for that I will use a layer mask, which I'll put around there so that it removes most of the particles where the woman is, because I don't want to have that many. And I will fill this with black. And you can see how it looks like. Now I want to soften this. You can apply a blur filter to the layer mask, or you can use the feather option. So just increase that, and you can see how you can soften this, and that way you remove most of the particles in this area, but you still keep them on the sides, which is what I want. Change the blend mode to screen, back to screen, so that most of the background is gone. And here we have this. You can see we still have those particles. If you want to remove them even or want to have them even less visible, you can also combine this with the opacity and just reduce the opacity a little bit. So we're done with the particles. The next thing I want to do is add light effects, some glows, and then we're almost done. And then we will go with the post-production and using Camera Raw to make the final touches to this. So let's make this manipulation look a little more dreamy and enhance a bit the fantasy part of it. So for that I will use light effects. I will create a new layer on top of everything and just create a new group, which I will name glows and colors. Now inside of this group I will create I created this layer, which I will switch to screen, and I will name it glows. And I use this layer to add some really soft glows of light, especially on corners. And for example, you can see I have this like big source of light which comes from the background. I could add a glow of light that is visible over these leaves and also over this part over here, and probably some glows of light here. You can also see that this part have some light. That comes, actually this one comes from the particles that we added on the previous step. But yeah, that's the kind of lights that I create to create sort of a more of a dreamy effect. So with the screen blend mode we can do this just fine. So basically what you do is use a really dark tone of color. For example, I can sample from here because I want to paint this area and I want to have the same color as here, but we have to use a really dark tone. And you can make tests to see how this works. So first, make sure you have a soft brush. The opacity and flow, I'll leave it to 100% and increase the brush size. And let me just make one click and see how it looks like. It looks good, but I want a softer brush. Let me also deactivate the transfer. So again, I'll click a couple of times there, maybe once here, but here I have to use something a little darker because I just want a touch of color over there, also over the hair. Here on this part you really want to use something very, very soft and very, yeah, just a touch of tone, a touch of color. Also on the background I want to add more colors, so for that I used another image, which is this one. So I overlaid this over the background. Now in order to hide this part over here, you can use the lasso tool and make a selection like this, a really rough selection, and go to edit fill and choose content aware fill and let Photoshop do the job. Hopefully it's going to do a good job. Yeah, not that bad. We're gonna blur this anyway, so don't worry too much. I just wanted to hide the girl. Just copy that, go back to, let's close this, go back to the manipulation, and here I will add this right on top of the background. And of course I have to change the size of it because it's too big. Yeah, this adds a touch of color that I really like. You can also stretch this, don't worry too much because, as I said, we're gonna blur this. And now what I will do is just go to filter, blur. I can use the Gaussian blur here. I don't need that much quality. And now what I will do is change the blend mode to screen. After changing the blend mode to screen, you will see that this left side is it's burnt out, so we lost all the details there. So in order to recover that, what you can do is create a layer mask for it. Get the brush tool, use a soft brush with an opacity and flow of about 50%, and gently paint with black so that you remove this part here, because it's burning too much of that. And also what I will do is probably saturate this a little more, you can see, so that we have a bit of color there. And let me unlink the layer mask and the image itself, because I want to see if I can, I don't know, probably rotate this around and see. Maybe I can get a better combination of colors here. Yeah, this one looks a little better because I like this red here on the bottom. And that's how I usually create dreamy effects on my manipulations. Now we're done with this. Then the last step is creating like what I call post-production. Usually I use camera raw and some general adjustments to make the final color tones on the manipulation. So let's move on and make the final step of this manipulation. Okay, we reached the final step of this manipulation, and the final step is where I usually create that wow effect on the manipulations, the final color tones and the final tweaks. It's where I finish things up and yeah, give that final color touch on the manipulation. This manipulation, it's really simple. We could have gone way further with using dodging and burning, skin retouching, adding makeup and adding more elements, maybe adding some crowns or jewelry or whatever. But I wanted to keep this simple because I just wanted to go over the entire process that I usually use to create manipulations like this using something simple. But you can complicate this way more if you want to. So usually what I do is create a new layer on top of everything, press Shift Option Command E or Shift Alt Control E on Windows. If you don't want to use the keyboard shortcut, what you can do is select the entire canvas with Control A or Command A, go to Edit, Copy Merge. This will copy the whole thing with everything merged, and paste this here. A lot of people, what they do is just merge the whole thing, and I don't like to work like that because I lose the entire work. So I want to have everything here. Instead, what I do is just create a stamp of all of the layers and then select all of them. I group them in a group called manipulation, and then I hide it. That way Photoshop does not render those layers and my computer can work more well, a little quicker, so I don't have to render all of those layers. So I'll name this final. So after naming this layer final, usually what I do is use usually I use the color lookup. I almost never use other adjustment layers because I have a list of lots of presets, most of them created by myself. The ones that I will use here, you will find them in the resources folder. So all you need to do is just click on this drop down and just choose load 3D LUT and locate them inside the resources folder with the same name that you see here. The process that I follow to add the effects is just I go with trying things out. So for example, let's say I start with this one. Okay, so well, I don't like this effect. I'll try another one. And when I find something that I think works well for this particular image and also with my personal preference, with my taste, I leave that there and then just drop. For example, this one I kind of like what it does with the colors, but I'll drop the opacity. I think that's too much. Let's try, for example, this one, the Fine Portrait. This is a preset that I created myself. Yeah, see how this one enhances the colors? So I'll leave that there and then duplicate the layer and try something else and see how that combines. Oh yeah, this one looks good, but I think it adds kind of too much blue on the shadows, so I'll probably drop the opacity a little more and create another copy. Now try something else, probably with a higher opacity so that I can see what it does. And after that, if I don't like the effect, I can go back and lower the opacity back to how it was. Let's try, for example, extreme Pastels, that's too strong. This one removes most of the colors, I don't like that. Edgy Amber, yeah, I know what that does. Fall colors, I think I like it, but obviously with the lower opacity. Okay, so these are the effects. What I do next is create yet another layer on top. This is how I work. I like to work non-destructively, so that's why I create stamps. So again, here I'll press Shift, Option, Command E. This will stamp everything into this new layer. So it takes all the effects and put them into a new layer. And I'll turn this into a smart object because I will now use Camera Raw. So go to Filter and choose Camera Raw Filter. Now, if you use a version that's previous to Photoshop CS6, I think Photoshop CS6 allows you to work with this. I'm not sure, I don't remember. But if you don't have Camera Raw as a filter, what you can do is save this image as a TIFF file and then open it back in Photoshop, and Photoshop will automatically open it in Camera Raw. So here what I do is, again, I'm not a guy of values, so of fixed values, let's say. So a lot of people ask me, why do you put this value? What are the correct values for highlights, for shadow? I don't know. I mean, there's no wrong or right values. You have to be careful not to burn the image, that's for sure. But there's no, I mean, every image is different, so you have to kind of go by what you see. That's why you need a good screen to start with. But and the experience helps you. But just go with what you see, you like, and what, I don't know, the image demands what really works. I don't know how to explain this. There are not right or wrong values. I mean, you don't have saturating this like this. It's really destroying the image. So be careful with that. Again, contrast is usually where people screw it up a lot, because they kind of increase things like that and then add texture and clarity, and this it's not looking good. It's too contrasty, especially if you're going with a dreamy effect. You don't want to have too much contrast. This already looks good, so probably you want to increase the local texture a little bit, and maybe a little bit the clarity, and maybe add some light back in the shadows to compensate for that. And yeah, you can change the general feel of the image by, for example, making it a little colder and maybe adding a little green in it. Use really low values. It's my advice. I think using lower values it's always better, because otherwise you can go overboard and things start to look really, really messy. Here you can do lots of things with the color gradings, which is new in the latest versions of Camera Raw. You can change the colors for highlights. I rarely use this, to be honest. I didn't incorporated this in my workflow yet. With the color mixer, I usually work with this. For example, I want to have more saturation on the yellows, so I could increase the yellows and shadows a little, the oranges, but not the luminance, the saturation, so I could make those yellows and oranges stand out a little more. The greens, I think I like how that looks. I'm not going to change that. One really cool thing you can do is here in the calibration. You can change the channels here. So you have the red, the green, and the blue. And what you can do here is change the hue of them. So if you want to have the reds, for example, be a little more pink or a little more magenta, you can slide this. Again, my advice is to not make like really drastic changes. What you can do is make really huge changes, go from one extreme to the other, just so you can see what it does, and then you can adjust from there. You can change the saturation. You can, for example, leave this to 0 and just change the saturation a little bit. On the greens, probably I like this more towards the right side, and saturation there. And with the blues, let's see what we can get here. See, the reds are already too saturated. Check this out. Here, 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 the lips, it's too saturated. So let's pull back there. Also, because here on the color mixer, I saturated this way too much. So probably go back on that. And I think we're good to go. One other thing you can do is use the filters. So for example, I could add like a really soft glow of light here, create a radial filter like that, increase probably the feather, and put everything back to 0 and just decrease the dehaze. See that? Just creates this big soft light. And of course you can change the color, well, the temperature of that. I don't want to mess with that too much, so probably leave it there. And one thing I want to do is on the effects, I want to add some vignetting. So drop the vignetting tool about -20. I think that looks okay. Roundness, I want to have it pretty round, and the midpoint right over there. And feather, yeah, increase the feather quite a lot. I don't want to have something like that, but something really soft. And let me zoom at 100% because probably grain would look nice here. Let me check that. So increase the grain and the roughness as well. Usually I like to add grain because this makes the whole image look a little more uniform, makes it look a little more real. I mean, it really depends on the style that you're after, but if you want to have something really smooth, you can do that if you want to have like a cartoon effect. But sometimes I like to use grain because I think it makes things look a little more natural. But that's really up to you, okay? So again, let me show you what we got on the previous step before coming to the post-production. So we ended up with this, and this is what we got with the final image, okay, with the post-production step before and after. So this is that final kick that you give to the image. It's not perfect. Some reds are too saturated here and here, as you can see. You could use layer mask to kind of get rid of that. And as I said, we did not make any brushing on the skin. We didn't soften the skin. We didn't use dodging and burning. So you can go a lot further from here if you want to. But I wanted to keep it simple and just show you the basic workflow that I follow when making this sort of fantasy, dreamy looking manipulations. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, just check my channel. I have more tutorials and I hope you will enjoy it. Thanks for watching. I'm Andrei and I hope to see you on my next tutorials.